Welcome back to the conference. I hope that you enjoy the annual meeting and the homegoing for our lost pen women. It is hard to believe that in 2 years that we have lost 9 pen women. We wish them a happy and peaceful eternity. I would like to move on to something that I've actually gotten quite a few requests for, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to play something that National had put together some time back, and it is called Why Be a Pen Woman? I think right now this is a great thing to hear more now than ever.
I'm a pen woman because I love being associated with creative women. They absolutely energize me.
I am a pen woman because I've wanted to support other women in the arts.
Because it's wonderful to be with a tribe of women that support your creative endeavors, and I support theirs.
Because I wanted a network of women where I could be myself.
Because I like to be with talented, creative women.
Who encourage me in my work and push me outside my comfort zone.
Who aren't afraid to explore their creativity.
And I found the women inspiring and supportive.
It's stimulating to be around them, and it's inspirational for my growth.
And it's a sisterhood that I'm proud to be a part of.
I joined because it would allow me the opportunity to discuss and talk with other women that may not have tapped into their creative side, or maybe they had tapped into it and they could give me some advice and guidance on how I might tap into mine.
I've always loved the energy that comes from being in a room of other creative people. And that's what it's all about, is helping other people out wherever they are in their journey.
I think the thing that makes it special is that we are, and I like to use the term, cross-creative professional women of writers, artists, and music. I just think it's the combined support from each other, and that we're all in this creative boat together.
I love the conversations that occur at our meetings. And I don't know that I would have had any of those same conversations among people other than peers that are going through the same thing.
We always have a guest speaker on all kinds of different topics relating to art, writing, and to music. Sometimes we have a musical performance. So it just varies every time. So you know when you go that you're going to really enjoy the program.
We have a first-class magazine, and you can participate in that magazine if you are a member, with your art, with your writing, your poetry. We have an excellent website. We also have a blog, a wonderful blog, and we have Poem of the Week, we have Art of the Week. It's a way to get yourself exposed, it really is, and it's really thrilling to see these people able to share a various part of the journey they've had.
I think other women should join Pen Women, because there is no other group that I know of in the country today that would afford you the same opportunity and access to so many women that are exploring their creativity.
My name is Luana Leisure, and I remembered seeing all of you last week. Thank you so much for having me back. I enjoy being around creative people. Being around the Pen Women, I realized I am like someone else, creative, inspiring, encouraging. That's why I'm a pen woman.
It's a great organization for any age, for mentoring, to be mentored, to get support from other people in your field. I think if you give it a try, that you will find that it is definitely worth your time and your energy, and you will benefit from it so much more than you realize.
I finally figured out that I speak another language, and that's pen women. It's like a household word to me because I've met so many creative women that share the same things that I share, and it's like I found my place in the world.
Right now, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our first workshop. Our two presenters, Claire Massey and Karen Morris, have written a workshop called Writing with Precision and Power. It is fascinating, it is enjoyable, and it's very informative. So much so that they have asked me to forward some of the paperwork that you should have gotten with the recordings so that you might have some questions answered and enjoy the workshop even more. Here now is the workshop.
Hello, I'm Claire Massey, welcoming you to our workshop, Writing with Precision and Power, exploring short forms of prose. As writers, you may have seen several terms for short forms of fiction and nonfiction, as well as the term prose poetry. For several decades now, in the realm of short fiction, you have probably seen the terms sudden fiction, or short shorts, or microfiction, or the term that seems to have gained wide usage, flash fiction. The most common word count limits you'll see for these forms are 1,000 words, 750, 500 words, or even 250 words. Flash nonfiction usually refers to the brief essay form and to work that is more memoir-based as opposed to purely essayistic or journalistic. Literary journals that ask for creative nonfiction will usually offer a submission category for flash nonfiction, which can have a word count ranging from 200 to 2,000 words, though 750 to 1,000 words seems the most common. The flash forms tend to be more fluid, allowing more experimentation with language and form. They combine narrative arc with the careful, distilled, economic language of poetry. Flash pieces borrow heavily from the methods of poetry, especially in the use of symbols, metaphors, and figurative language. Some writers feel that the flash forms require more expertise and precision from the writer, not less. So if you are a poet who would like to delve into prose writing, you have already acquired a valuable skill set. In this workshop, I'll be exploring these prose forms, and Karen Morris will also be discussing the prose poem in depth. We hope our workshop discussion and analyses of these forms will encourage you to experiment and enjoy creating precise and powerful new pieces, adding more depth to your writing talents. Thank you for joining me to explore the flash forms of prose. I'd like to discuss 3 examples that illustrate the art of economy and the adage that less is more. These selections were included in your handout if you would like to follow along. The first piece is The Poet's Husband by Molly Giles from Microfiction, an anthology of really short stories. By the way, this collection was edited by a Floridian, the late Jerome Stern, who was director of the writing program at Florida State and sponsored the world's best short story contest. Entries were limited to a 300-word count, and first prize was a check and a crate of oranges. A bit about Molly Giles. She has won numerous awards, including the Flannery O'Connor Award for Short Fiction. I consider her a master of the form. I've included several of her books on your handout as suggestions for further reading. Let's look at what she achieves and how she does it in The Poet's Husband. This is the only selection I'm going to read aloud because it is so short. The Poet's Husband by Molly Giles. He sits in the front row, a large man with large hands and large ears, dry lips, fresh cut hair, pink skin, clear eyes that don't blink. A nice man, calm. That's the impression he gives. A quiet man who knows how to listen. He is listening now as she sways on the stage in a short black dress and reads one poem about the time she slit her wrist and another poem about a man she still sees and a third poem about a cruel thing he himself said to her 6 years ago that she never forgot and never understood. And he knows that when she is finished, everyone will clap, and a few, mostly women, will come up and kiss her. And she will drink far too much wine, far too quickly. And all the way home, she will ask, "What did you think? What did you really think?" And he will say, "I think it went very well," which is, in fact, what he does think. But later that night, when she is asleep, he will lie in their bed and stare at the moon through a spot on the glass that she missed. Wow. She was laser focused on characterizing both husband and wife and their marriage in less than 300 words. There's no introductory opening. She jumps right into a character sketch of the husband. There's no space for background or history or full descriptions. She immediately, in the first few lines, uses telling details to portray this man. She uses the subjects of the wife's poems to create a revealing portrait of the poet. Let's look at the ending. Herein lies a tip for economy and efficiency in your own writing. Don't conclude or summarize, but end with an action or image that will linger in the memory of your reader, as Molly Giles has so skillfully done in the last half of one sentence that ends her story. Now, we will move on to Flash Nonfiction, which includes Flash essays, or you may hear the term craft essays, and short, vignette-based, slice-of-life memoir. I want to call your attention to two books that are the ultimate resources for reading and learning about Flash nonfiction. This is the Rose Metal Press Field Guide to Writing Flash Nonfiction, edited by Denny W. Moore, and this is The Best of Brevity, edited by Zoe Bozier and Denty Moore. If you are interested in this form, please read the Brevity Literary Journal, which is available online. Don't worry about writing down any of these references or resources because they're all in your handout. The writers with the Brevity Journal truly set the standard for Flash nonfiction. Go to brevitymag.com and you can explore their archives and their numerous articles on the craft of writing. We're going to take a look at an example essay by Brian Doyle. Brian Doyle was a prolific writer who unfortunately passed away in 2017. And he was young, he was only 60 years old, and died of a brain tumor. A great loss for the writing community. Just Google his name and you will find links for his biographical information and his many award-winning works. I think the trajectory of his career as a creative writer is interesting because he began in journalism in the arena of magazine writing. His essays on nature, faith, compassion, and gratitude are, to me, enthralling commentary on the human condition. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the job of the writer is to listen and watch, to pay fierce attention to the holy of everything, not just the beautiful song of the holy, but the bruised and broken holy as well. I hope you enjoyed Brian Doyle's essay, Imagining Foxes from the Best of Brevity, as much as I did. I chose to discuss it because it illustrates several important differences in flash forms and more traditional essays. Did you notice how often he employs the elements of fiction? Look at his opening line. One time, many years ago, when the world and I were young, I spent a day in a tiny cedar forest with my sister and brother. Doesn't this convey a once upon a time fairy tale, fable-like quality? In the first paragraph, he grounds you immediately in the setting, and he offers very little history or background. He tells you the name of the island originated by indigenous people, and he tells you in no more than one sentence where it's located in the state of New York. That's it. If he had written a more traditional essay, he might have begun with statistics on the impact of urbanization on wildlife. He might have followed that with some expository writing on the need for children living in cities to visit state parks and wild places. But look at how vividly, how memorably he gets his message across by telling you a story in less than 1,000 words. What are some takeaway tips for writing flash nonfiction? Think like a fiction writer. Draw the reader in quickly with your opening line. Frame your theme or message in one impactful scene or one powerful memory. You don't have to fill space with a plethora of facts, explanation, or persuasive insights, as you might do in a more conventional essay. Use lyrical, descriptive language in the way a poet or fiction writer would. Don't you just see these places when Brian Doyle writes the tiny shards of beaches, the ragged, forgotten corner thickets with beer bottles glittering in the duff? Remember that you don't have to write the absolute literal truth, the gospel detail, if that will detract from your memoir. If your beloved auntie died in the spring, but you think it would enhance your piece to make the season winter, make it winter. The primary goal is to convey the emotional truth of what you experienced in a way that will engage your reader and stick in her mind. The third piece I'd like to discuss is my own flash fiction, A Formula for Entropy. story was inspired by a prompt in another wonderful resource, Brevity of Flash Fiction Handbook by David Gallup. The exercise was to link 5 images in a sketch of 500 words. The assigned images were a tropical sunset, and here I cheated a little bit because I changed it to sunrise. And I think my word total came out at 503, but I really tried. A snowshoe, a half-eaten can of tuna, algebra homework, and the death of an old uncle. It's amazing the way a prompt that seems constraining can unleash the story that's been percolating just at the threshold of a writer's consciousness. Limited word counts teach the art of ruthless editing. And that's another takeaway tip. Cut every word that does not carry your story forward. Much depends on implication, word choice, and the connotative context. Be like the photographer who crops out distracting elements. Compose only the most relevant details to capture a compressed moment in time. Could a piece like this be written as a flash memoir rather than fiction? Yes, it could have, depending on the degree of truth in the author's experience. I think it illustrates how genres are beginning to bend and blend, and I think that's all to the creative good. I will leave you with a final observation about flash forms. It has been said that they actually require a deeper engagement to uncover the subtle truths and essences that have been left unstated. Like a poem, they often require a second reading to savor meaning. As for the writer, she must step closer to the heart of her story. She must expose the kernel when it is most vibrant and tender. I have included some prompts on your handouts that may help you step closer to the heart of your story. In particular, I'd like to call your attention to prompt number 4, which asks you to write a short story of traditional length using the same plot or idea. You then cut until you have a word count commensurate with that of flash fiction. 750 words is good, 500 is even better, and if you're really feeling brave, you could attempt 250. This exercise will help you engage in the rigorous and austere editing that these compact forms require. I hope you will try your hand at these forms and that the prompts provided in the handout will lead to a novel and freeing writing experience for you. In the near future, Karen Morse will be sharing the poems and prose pieces that you write in response to our prompts, if you choose to participate and share your work with other workshop attendees. Thank you very much for your attention. I can already hear the scribble of pens and the clicking of keyboards. Right on, pen women. And I look forward to meeting and talking with you all in the near future, I hope.
Welcome to Writing with Precision and Power, exploring the prose poem. It sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? It used to be simpler. There was poetry, there was prose, and you could easily tell the difference by the way the words looked on the page. Poetry had those important and effective line breaks, and prose just looked like blocks of writing on the page. So is prose poetry a new invention? Apparently not. Most poetry experts suggest that the King James Version of the Bible contains some prose poetry, also some fables and parables. In 19th century France, Baudelaire and Rimbaud were producing some, and in the United States, Walt Whitman. But I tell you, I have just recently begun to notice prose poetry. I've been seeing it in online journals, I've been reading it, appreciating it, and even started to write it. So what exactly is a prose poem? Well, some things that a prose poem is not. It's not the same thing as free verse, and it's not just a lineated poem formatted to look like a paragraph. I tried to do that early on. I took a traditional poem I'd written and squashed it into a paragraph form, and it didn't work at all. But a prose poem does look like a paragraph without indentation. It has no line breaks or regular rhyme and rhythm, but it does have what all good poetry has. For example, metaphor, figurative language, alliteration, internal rhyme, vivid diction, cadence, brevity, each word packing a punch. Now, prose poems do lack the secondary rhythmic layer of that line break. A lineated poem asks the reader to focus on the line, something like looking at a shot in a film. But since this isn't available in a prose poem, the emphasis must be on the sentence and the paragraph. Poet Marilyn Chin calls herself a lyric poet who likes to tell tales, and likens the prose poem to a flat and square canvas with many possibilities. So a prose poem can tell a story. The poet Lola Haskins says she uses the prose poem form when she wants to tell a story in which imagery looms large, and that in her view, prose poems sit more strongly on the page. So a prose poem can be narrative, but not just narrative. For sure, a lot of prose poetry is meditative, but I have read some that don't make sense at all to me. And I'm sitting there scratching my head thinking, does this verb even have a subject? Or how can those words even fit together? I'm a firm believer that poetry should be understandable, what some people call accessible. And as a poet, I want my poetry to be first understood, or at least have its meaning grasped, even if it's just from the unique experience of the reader, and then have it appreciated for its craft. Poet Gary Young believes that in a prose poem, we can embrace the surreal, a bit of arsenic, a bit of starlight. By the way, Gary Young is a poet that I've really come to admire, and I've used one of his poems in the workshop handout. And when I wrote to him and asked permission to use it, he was wonderful. And he sent me one of his books called Bear Flag Republic, Prose Poems and Poetics from California. And I've used this book as a good resource for the workshop. But his phrase, a bit of arsenic and a bit of starlight, just captured my imagination. I'm thinking, how can we make our poetry do that? Derek McCown says that a prose poem's lack of rigorous definition leaves it all too often a domain subject to sloppy metaphysical meditations, bland sequences of impressions, and self-congratulatory surrealism. The challenge, he goes on to say, and I think this is the essence of a successful prose poem, there's something really intimate about it. It draws the reader in and keeps her there. unlike a lineated poem can do, because the line breaks kind of give you some room to think and kind of metaphorically look around. But McCown says the challenge of a prose poem is its openness and intimacy. By eliminating lineation, it is more conspicuously sustained by a dramatic voice that must draw the reader into the immediate occasion, then deliberately and conspicuously cut away. Diane Wachowski has some thoughts on the haiku as it relates to a prose poem. She says that to eliminate the line breaks in a haiku would eliminate the surprise revelation at the end and make the haiku lose its power, rendering it just a sentence, or even worse, some sort of explanatory sentence. And of course, you don't ever want your poetry to explain. Diane Wachowski writes, and of course the same thing would be true of the prose poem as of the haiku. What happens to revelation, the new breath of surprise we have come to expect at the ending of a good poem? I think one answer to the question is that in a good prose poem, each sentence is a small surprise. But it's not enough of a surprise to be a revelation, the kind that completes the poem. I think it's time to take a look at some of the prose poems on your handout, and I'll try to explain why I think they are very successful and excellent prose poems. And I've thrown in one of mine at the end too. Let's take a look at one by Gary Young. So beautifully crafted. The earth submits to seasonal drift. The stars slide and the planets swing higher over the horizon every day. This morning, the sun sent a shaft of light through a rift in the redwoods. It followed the steep angle of the canyon, skirted the stream, the wild azalea, the granite cut bank, and shined on the brick stoop beneath the stone arch at our gate. It rested there only for a moment, but my son found it. He sat there warming himself, and anyone watching the light play over his body could have believed he was made of gold. The first line has that intriguing phrase, seasonal drift, and it draws you in and makes you wonder about that. And the nice soft sound of the alliteration submits to seasonal drift, the stars slide, the planets swing, continuing in sun sent a shaft and skirted the redwoods. In that natural alliteration of rift in the redwoods. And what excellent word choice with rift and skirted. This whole poem is just like a beam of light that starts from stars and the planets, and it goes to our sun, and it follows it all the way through nature to find this little boy and momentarily turn him to gold. He uses onomatopoeia with the phrase granite cut bank, and the very fine revelation at the end, that image of the child of gold. I think a really good prose poem leaves the reader saying, ah. Robert Miltner's prose poem, You Know What They Say About Pears, shows that they can be lighthearted and funny too. Frumpy, heavy-hipped, green with envy of apples, the pears wear babushkas and pull carts filled with celery and cabbage out past West 88th in Detroit. Grainy sweet like candy eaten at the beach, freckled in or out of the sun, a pear is the younger child all brothers and sisters watch out for, but never want to play with. The sad pears, Bartlett and Bosch, Seckel and Danjou, cry themselves to sleep. They see themselves as teardrops, tongueless bells unable to celebrate, or quotation marks with nothing to say. In their dreams, they run away to Hollywood and become avocados. His use throughout of personification makes this one work. Playing with the pear's shape, he calls them heavy-hipped, and he describes them as being old women with scarves tied under their chin, selling vegetables. Definitely not a glamorous image. I like the way he takes the trite phrase green with envy and makes it fresh, because of course pears are green. Continuing with the use of personification, he calls pears unlike siblings and uses metaphor to describe a pear as a teardrop or a bell that can't ring, showing, the shape of the pear. At the end, we have that final personification where the pears dream of running away to Hollywood to become avocados, when we expect it to say to become movie stars. And it leaves you with kind of like, oh, well, how come it would be better to be an avocado than a pear? In a definite change of tone, Camille Dungy's prose poem, This Beginning May Have Always Been Its End, has as its title a sentence that draws the reader in. The concept of the beginning of something also meaning its end is something you want to read about further. Coming from a place where we meandered mornings and met quail, scrub jay, mockingbird, I knew coyote like everyone else. I knew cactus, knew tumbleweed, lichen on the rocks and pillbugs beneath, rattler sometimes, the soft smell of sage and the ferment of cactus pear. Coming from this place, from a place where grass might grow greener on the hillside in winter than in any yard, where the whole rest of the year, everything I loved, chaparral pea, bottlebrush tree, jacaranda, mariposa, pinon, and desert oak, the kumquat in the back garden, and wisteria vining the porch, the dry grass whispering long after the last rains, raccoons in and out of the hills, trash hurled by the hottest wind, the dry grass tall now and golden, lawn chairs, eucalyptus, everything in a place we knew, everything we knew, little and large and mine and ours, except horror, all of it, everything could flame up that quickly, could flare and be gone. One thing you notice right away is that the first word of this poem is coming and the last word is gone. And you definitely, as a reader, want to know what has transpired between the two. The poet uses subtle alliteration, pairing words like meandering, morning, and met, and the soft smell of sage, grass might grow greener, and rains and raccoon. She uses an almost encyclopedic list of wonderful plants and animals that have comprised her life, emphasizing the quality of them by the repetition of the word everything, and her intimacy with them by repeating the word knew. I knew, I knew, knew, knew. These were things that were woven into her life, known for years, known every day. And the revelation at the end is that they are all gone now, gone in an instant, destroyed by fire. And you can't leave this poem without going back to its title and pondering it. C.G. Hanslechek has fun with you with the title, kind of fools you, called Meditation on Mockers. Now, a meditation it connotes deep thought on something. And so who are these mockers? Well, it turns out they're mockingbirds. I know the mockingbirds in the maple are sitting on eggs. I know this because on Sunday, they exploded from the tree and drove away a pair of crows who returned twice more for scrambled eggs, but who got nowhere but to the very tip of a deodar, tossed by the bewildering wind, cackling quietly to themselves. And I know this because on Monday, one of them chased a squirrel for 50 yards along a power line. The squirrel looked like a drunken ballerina, legs whipping every which way, not at all on point. And today, both of them swooped down and pecked the tail of a portly cat until he loped off, bereft of dignity, utterly uncatted. Soon a half-naked, downy choir will sway in rhythm, open-mouthed, begging for bugs. His use of exciting and unique words carries this one. From exploding from the tree, and if you've ever come too close to a mockingbird nest, you understand that. And the wind that is bewildering, to having them swoop down on a portly cat who's completely uncatted, and what a nice combination of sounds with those two words together. And then having the crows cackling quietly is onomatopoeia, and the simile of the rebuffed squirrel as a drunken ballerina with legs going which way is both vivid and accurate. And the ending of the soon-to-hatch baby birds, like a choir in a church, kind of a lofty image, and then the ending, begging for bugs, brings you back to earth. And I think that is a masterful ending. Christine Kitano's prose piece begins as a narrative taking place in the very recent past. And then she tucks in a memory in the middle and brings it full circle with describing the speaker's present. The hour after Dad left. The doctor hands me a plastic drawstring bag. Inside are my father's khaki Dockers, size 37 waist, his white undershirt, and a pair of brown socks, the elastic around the ankles pulled loose. His shoes are gone, and so is the cash from his wallet. I leave without them. I empty the bag onto the carpet in my bedroom and pull the undershirt to my cheek. It smells of shoe polish, just the way it had when he took me on the carousel of the Santa Monica Pier. He hugged my waist so I wouldn't slip from my seat on the wooden white horse, my small hands clinging to its gilded mane. Every time the flushing horizon came around, I would point and he would look. Inside the pocket of his khaki pants, I find a half-eaten Hershey bar. The chocolate is melted around the wrapper's torn edge. He always broke his candy in two, saving half for me when I came home from school. This half is mine. I peel the melted paper from the chocolate and break off a square. The sugary syrup stings my back molar. I breathe in, and both my tooth and lungs feel hollow. Kitano tells her story kind of matter-of-factly. There's no overt sentiment, but the feelings evoked are powerful. She's bringing home her father's effects from the hospital, that he is not returning home. At home, she lifts his shirt to her cheek and she can smell the aroma of the shoe polish, and that triggers a memory of when she was a little girl, and that takes center stage. All those times he took her on the carousel, made sure she was secure on the horse, and how beautifully she describes that, her small hand clinging to the gilded mane. And as the carousel circles round, each time she notices the sunset, the flushing sky, and what a fine choice of adjective. She would point at it and her father would look, indicating both physical and emotional support and sensitivity. The final paragraph in a prose poem can have more than one paragraph, brings us to the present and the discovery of the chocolate bar torn in half, as always, his intent to share it with her to the end. The revelation, that hollowness and pain she feels at his permanent absence in her life, at the very core of her life, her breath. And notice in the Kitano poem, by the way, there's a complete absence of telling, of explaining. At no point does she say something like, My father was protective of me and he took me to fun places. She shows all of that and she doesn't tell. And that's what you want to do in your poetry. Here's a poem, prose poem that I have written. It starts, Forsythia takes me back. The bitter cold, colorless winter here in North Alabama loitered far too long, and by March, like a shipwrecked soul scouring the horizon, I was poised for any sign of a green stem or leaf. A merciless hurricane had flooded our coastal home, and we became expatriates, abandoning our quartz pink camellias and the amethyst blossoms of the cherry tree to endure wrinkle hand oak leaves smothering every surface except the outcroppings of boulders, gray, petrified Jurassic herbivores. At last, daffodils, hard crayoned yellow, then swarms of white pear, delicate lavender magnolia, branch-hugging redbud, and forsythia. Some 20 years ago, I took a picture of them, blazing candelabra, at my parents' house at my parents' South Carolina home. Any sighting now recalls my mother and father, the country road walks when I compose poetry in my head as I stroll by cornfields, inquisitive cows, draping vines, gourds strung for purple martin houses. Sometimes in tears from some passing grief, and finally a lasting grief when they died. To see them blooming here in Alabama with their sky-seeking branches of lemony flowers reminds me of all my homes, my longings, my seasons of exile. I used a simile, the shipwrecked soul scouring the horizon, and also used a little subtle alliteration in that. And later I described the dead fallen oak leaves as wrinkled hands. It's a metaphor, and that metaphor becomes a personification when I portray them as smothering everything. I call the outcroppings of boulders Jurassic herbivores for another metaphor. Then I went on to show all the colors of the spring blossoms. A friend of mine who read the poem, and I definitely think that you should always have a couple of people read your poems and give you feedback, thought that I used too much color. And I value her opinion, but I did want to emphasize all the color contrasting with the drab winter that had just passed. And then I blend in a memory of forsythia and how it always triggers a memory of my parents' place. I call them blazing candelabra as a metaphor, and I get in some more alliteration with cornfields and inquisitive cows. Finally, I hope that my final sentence, in which I use a rhetorical device called ascendanton, in absence of the word and climactic order, to hopefully give my readers a revelation that the forsythia always reminds me of so much more than just my parents' house or more than spring, but all my homes that I've ever had, the things I've longed for, and the times I've been in exile. Well, every good writing workshop contains a writing activity possibility. So for all of you poets who want to try your hand at writing a prose poem, here's some things you can do. How about a poem about something that will always be out of reach? How do or will you handle this knowledge? A poem about traveling, whether it's taking a road trip or flying in a plane or spending the afternoon on a train. Write about the sights you experience while being en route to somewhere new or familiar. What did you learn or realize? Draft a poem about a valuable object in your home or on your property as inspiration. What's its history? What does it look like? What is its meaning in your life? How about a poem that you write after visiting a local park, a farm, or a forest? And something inspired by that adventure. Be sure to include sights, sounds, textures, and colors. And how did the experience change you? Draft a poem that recalls a moment from your youth. What was its significance? Put your draft away for a day or two. Come back to it. Check. Have you used specific nouns and vivid verbs? Have you varied the line length? Have you shown, not told? Have you used imagery, a simile, a metaphor, repetition? Have you appealed to the senses? Have you selected the very best words? Have you used word sounds effectively? Does your first sentence draw the reader in and your last sentence make the reader go, ah? If titled, does your title intrigue? Think about writing something 6 to 12 lines long, although anything you come up with is fine. But make sure that you've cut and edited until there are no excess words. Put it away, consider all these again, edit again, think about letting a couple of people look at it for feedback. There's an optional follow-up activity to share your work. Send your prose poem to me at this email address by November 18th. Make sure you put your name on it, and I will compile a document with all the work submitted. And sometime after Thanksgiving, I'll send this document to everyone who submitted something. Use the same follow-up procedure if you wrote a prose poem and or a piece for Claire, who will present the second half of the workshop. So a maximum of 2 pieces. They'll all be put in the same document for all the participants' reading pleasure. If you have any questions all about that, you can email me at this address for some clarification. Finally, in the introduction to the Penguin Book of the Prose Poem from Baudelaire to Anne Carson, editor Jeremy Noel-Todd says, "Our habitual expectation when we see a passage of prose is that it will explain, not sing. So that's our challenge, to make our prose poems sing." At the very end of your worksheet handout, I provided some links to another work by one of the workshop poets that we just discussed, and I know you will love reading another poem by these great prose poets. I thank you for your attention. Go out, try to write a really good prose poem, make it sing. Thank you for your attention. I'd like to thank all the fine poets for giving me permission to use their work. Gary Young sent me his book, Bear Flag Republic, Prose Poems and Poetics from California. The essays here provided me a wealth of knowledge, and I discovered the poetry of C.G. Hanslechek and Christine Kitano, as well as many others. Abigail Beckel and Kathleen Rooney of Rose Metal Press, whose book Prose Poetry, Contemporary Poets in Discussion and Practice gave me great insight and introduced me to some fantastic prose poets. They were also so kind in helping me get in touch with Gary Young and Robert Miltner. And finally, thanks to Camille Dungy and the Poetry Foundation for use of her poem.
In March of 2020, I had already delved myself into searching for the location for this particular conference. And after searching and doing some research, I decided on the location of Sarasota, Florida. Now, we all know that we're not in Sarasota, Florida right now together. However, I wanted to take the opportunity to share something special. I have a vignette of a very, very special member, a beloved member, certainly of Sarasota and most likely of all of Florida penwomen. Her name is Betty Altman. She made some fantastic contributions to the world of art and to the National League of American Penwomen, and she was a beloved member of the Sarasota branch. And if not for her, we feel very doubtful that we would have our current program that we have every year for our high school students, a scholarship program called Launching Leaders into the Arts. She certainly did make an impact, and she continues through her foundation to give every year to the high school students. I want you to enjoy Betty Altman.
Betty was born in Rochester, New York on May 4, 1914. She began her career studying oil painting at the Art Institute in Chicago during the 1950s and 1960s under notable artists such as Sid Rafelson, Hilda Rubin, and John Cadell. She made numerous trips to Europe, in particular France, where she studied at the Château de Naples, as well as the International Center for Contemporary Art. Betty's painting venues included the Cork Gallery at the Lincoln Center in New York City and the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. Altman received numerous awards in juried art shows and was a founding, supporting, and honorary member of Art Uptown. In addition, she was the chairwoman for the Sarasota Glen Galleries Boys Club. Betty was most admirably Woman Contemporary Artist 2000 Woman of the Year. Betty Altman served as president for 4 years at the National League of American Penwomen's Sarasota branch. And she was also Art Awards program contributor and chair from the program's inception decades ago. This would decades later become Launching Leaders into the Arts. Betty was awarded the 2005 Penn Woman of the Year Award. In describing her own work, Betty once said, "I've always tried to stir the mind, stimulate imagination, and pull the viewer into my paintings by providing enough of the abstract to allow the viewer's imagination to take hold and play with the image." The National League of American Penwomen website, in a tribute, describes her work thusly. Her world is full of color, mesmerized by the awesome forces of nature, the sunsets, the storms, and ever-changing water world of the Gulf of Mexico, all of which are perfectly framed in her living room. To her we say, Betty, we will always remember your life and message of compassion, generosity, dedication, and the twinkle in your eye. Thank you.
I would like to take the opportunity to thank Sarasota's very own Barbara Jendrysik for providing all of those beautiful pictures of Betty Allman. Thank you. Well, we have already represented letters, so let's move on to compositions and music. And I think most of you know who Sheila Firestone is. She is a well-known composer. She is ultimately so talented, very well-spoken, and a heck of an educator. She has offered to us an opportunity that she took when she heard the written word of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Now, we all know that name from his niece, Eleanor. So what happened was she was very inspired by some written word and decided to work on a composition. So I'd like to present to you Sheila Firestone and The Forest Primeval.
Very excited to share this work with you today. And I especially was happy that Dale could introduce those of you who are not familiar with Pen Women to our history, because one of the things that Pen Women do is at a state level, they offer all kinds of shows and conferences where works can win prizes, and where people who are, some of our artists who are new artists, they're beautiful art shows. For the composers, sometimes it's difficult to find venues for composers who are just starting out, and they offer some wonderful opportunities to have the works heard, be in the various competitions, and also to get to know other musicians, artists, and writers, which is what keeps me in this organization. I really love the mix of people. So a little bit of I really wanted to share that. The piece that I'm sharing with you today came about because of my Delian Society membership. Some of you have heard or seen some of the works on the internet or on YouTube. The Delian Society is a group of composers who are international, and they work together to put together suites of work. And each one of us contributes a little piece of that entire suite. Our founder, Joseph Ford, passed away about 2 years ago. And we didn't want to let the group dissolve. We were probably the first, Joe's idea, he was probably the first person to ever get the idea to have composers from all over the world. He was on the cutting edge of computers and music being used in this way. And so probably the Delian Society was the first of its type. And we wrote most of our composers are tonal music, except that I'm now turning to 12-tone music, which I've broken the rule. It's a society for tonal music. Ben can appreciate that. He's a musician too, and it plays. Did you say the no?
Trombone.
Instrument.
Yeah, I do a couple different things, but trombone mostly.
Yeah. So anyway, when I started, I had read the poem Evangeline and had neglected to notice its beauty as a kid. Probably we all had the experience in high school or junior high of being introduced to the story, or the poem without being introduced to the story. The story of Evangeline is very interesting, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Wadsworth Longfellow. Thanks, Arlene.
he heard about it when he hosted a dinner with Nathaniel Hawthorne and had invited a Reverend Crowley, I believe his name was, no, Connolly, excuse me, Horace Connolly. And he brought the story about a young woman named Evangeline, I'm assuming, whose fiance or betrothed, they grew up in a little village in Nova Scotia. During the French and Indian War, the men of Nova Scotia refused to fight in the war, and so they were taken away in the middle of the night. And the young girl was crushed by this and spent the rest of her life searching for her love. They were taken away, actually, many of the people to America, to New Orleans. And that group of people are known in our society today as the Cajun people. So when you hear my piece, I did two things. I put in two folk tunes. One called Jolie Blonde, which is a Cajun, almost their national song. It's a folk dance that they dance to, they sing to. A lot of Cajun singers enjoy that piece. And then I also added in a little piece that I had actually written when the Haitians had a very terrible hurricane, and it was called Dodo Teet Teet. And I varied it and put in a little bit of it into this piece because I very much wanted to represent Native peoples who get displaced for one reason or another, be it a storm, be it a political situation. And it's really why when I reread the preamble, I reread the whole poem, but there's a portion called the preamble to Evangeline. And the preamble speaks not so much to the story as to what happens to the land, what happens to the people that used to live there. Where are the people that the land is still longing for? Where are those original natives? And that really struck a chord with me. And that's seriously what got me started, aside from the exquisite language. That was what today when we read poetry, a lot of the poetry is in very current language. This language is, I think you'll see it. I put the words on the film so that you could follow the images that I had in my mind, or somewhat had in my mind, and so that you could see the words and what inspired the writing. Then when the piece itself is over, it will say on the screen, and I'm hoping that you will all decide to join in and write your reactions to the music, or if you're inspired with a poem of your own or a little piece of prose or any thought that comes to you, or even a sketch. I see a lot of writers here, but I even see some movement people here. So if you're inspired to move to the music, Sue, be my guest. And Rena, and you can demonstrate that if you like afterwards. Anyway, so you have, for the first half of the film is the music with the words on the music. The second half of the film is the music by itself, and I hope that that will be a time for you to kind of go inside and let the music speak to you. The poem spoke to me, and I'm hoping the music will speak to you in whatever way it does. And then for those of you who are willing, I'd love to share your reactions. So if you do write something and you'd like to share it, we would love to hear it. Many of our members who are here are writers, and we've done Vera one day conducted a workshop in her house where we did just this kind of thing, just listening to music with no visuals. And we had some stunning writing. It's done. And I wanted to be the first to share it with a general audience with my music.